Do you mind if I use my phone real quick just to pull up the definition of apartheid?
Yeah, go ahead.
So apartheid is a system of racial segregation and oppression where one racial group has power over another. Let's make some core policy examples. First of all, limiting contact between racial groups, restricting movement, and prohibiting access to certain public statements. In Israel, apartheid is being practiced against Palestinians who are not allowed to move between different areas. Surely there are Israeli Palestinians, there are Palestinian citizens of Israel, but that doesn't necessarily prove that Israel's not engaging in apartheid because, classic apartheid state, South Africa, there were black people who were citizens, there were mixed race people who were called colored in South Africa who were citizens, but it's commonly recognized that South Africa was practicing apartheid.
Okay, perfect. Ready for me to respond?
Yeah, for sure, dude.
Okay. So I agree with you that apartheid is going to be a system of government in which people are racially segregated and there is two tiers of citizens, one of a certain racial group and one of another. But I think that apartheid is much more than that. South Africa wasn't just called apartheid. The South African government called their system of government apartheid. Yeah. That's where the word comes from. In South Africa, every single black person who lived in South Africa was moved from where they lived into 20% of the country while white people took 80% of the country. They were called Bantustans, where the black people were put. They called them primitive or native or whatever, okay? Yeah, sure. So with that being said, I think that you also have to consider the cultural aspects of South Africa during apartheid when laying out a definition for apartheid. I think it's going to have to be at least somewhat similar to apartheid South Africa with the obvious racial segregation and stuff like that, okay? So you said that there is restricted movement in Israel, that Palestinians aren't allowed to drive on certain roads and not allowed to go certain places. I would like to first lay out the fact that Palestinian is not a race, it's not an ethnicity, it's a nationality.
Would you say Israeli is a race?
No.
Okay.
It's a nationality.
Would you say...
Well, let me finish here real quick.
Go ahead.
So Palestinian is nationality because it's not a racial group. Palestinian is belonging to the Palestinian Authority, having the Palestinian Authority as your government in the same way that being Israeli is having the Israeli government as your governing authority, living in Israel, within the borders of Israel. Okay, that's what Palestinian and Israeli are. They're not races. Okay, so first of all, we've established that they do in some way discriminate against Palestinians by not letting them go to certain places. That's not apartheid because it's not a race. We don't allow Mexicans to do whatever they want when they come to the United States, okay, because they're not U.S. citizens. They don't have the same rights as U.S. citizens because they're not U.S. citizens. They're Mexican citizens. They're nationals of another country in the same way Palestinians are. With that being said, the actual racial group that Palestinians belong to is largely Arab. They're Arabs, okay? That's their ethnicity. With that being said, over a quarter, or roughly a quarter of Israel's population are Arabs. Those Arabs are allowed to do whatever they want within Israel. They're allowed to vote in elections. They're allowed to go wherever they want, do whatever they want. There are roughly a dozen members of the Israeli Knesset that are Arabs. There is an Arab-Israeli Supreme Court justice. His name is Khalid Kabab. And an Arab-Israeli Supreme Court justice sentenced a Israeli president, Moshe Katsav, to prison for sexual assault. That would never happen in apartheid South Africa. I think that you pointed out that because Israel discriminates against Palestinians, that it can still be apartheid even if they're not directly outlining the race. I disagree with you because if it was based on race, if it was that they didn't want to specifically say Arabs don't have rights and they wanted to discriminate against Arabs, and they did so by discriminating against Palestinians because Palestinians are Arabs, then why wouldn't they also discriminate against Israeli Palestinians, Israeli Arabs, or not make Arab Israelis Israeli citizens? Because when Israel was established in 1948, every single Arab that was still present within the borders of Israel was granted Israeli citizenship, and immediately upon its conception, they were Arab members of the Israeli Knesset. Not later on, not a decade later, immediately upon Israel's conception, there were Arabs invited into the Knesset. On top of that, you said, let's see, what did you say? You said that Israel is not practicing apartheid within Israel, but rather in places like Gaza or the West Bank. I fundamentally disagree with that as well because Area C of the West Bank is Israeli territory. That is Israel. Okay, Area B is jointly controlled by the PA and by Israel. Area A is solely Palestinian territory. Israel doesn't have control in Area A of the West Bank, so they can't practice apartheid there. They don't have control in Gaza either. They're not the government of Gaza. If there's apartheid in Gaza, it's Hamas, not Israel. And there is apartheid in those areas. Jews are not allowed into Areas A of the West Bank, and they're not allowed into Gaza either.
Okay, I think like you're valid on everything, but I feel like you're using apartheid as if it's some sort of abstract term. Apartheid
It is abstract.
No, apartheid's historically rooted.
Once, yeah, in South Africa.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to consider
Can I
the
finish
conditions.
talking? Can I finish? Okay, I appreciate it. Just to keep things even between us.
Go ahead.
In South Africa, where apartheid was practiced, definitions of race weren't strict. And there were people who are mixed or who are black who are included in government, right? This doesn't disqualify Israel from being an apartheid state.
There was not black people in government in South Africa.
Yeah, there was.
They were totally discriminated against. There was representatives in the Bantustans. Specifically, they called them tribal chiefs, but they were not in full forced apartheid in South
That's
Africa. There were not black members.
sorry,
One
you're
sec.
correct.
Let me finish
I
real
was
quick.
talking before you,
Let me finish. Just let me finish. There was
Go ahead.
I'll
grant this to him, guys.
there was not black leaders in South Africa, and also you keep pointing out this framework of race where there's like colored people, mixed people, people of Indian descent, whatever. There's no such framework in Israel.
Area A is, although not legally, it is under military occupation if you consider that the PA is bounded by the agreements it has towards Israel. Israel has superior military force. It has military forces stationed in the West Bank. I also think your point about Arabs being allowed into the Knesset right after the conception of Israel, I think you have to consider the fact of the Nakba, and that in 1948, millions of Palestinians were driven out of their homes by military force. I think we agree on most things. I think we have most of our facts straight. I would say for us, it's a term disagreement. I think I would use the word apartheid to describe Israel because it's useful. I don't think apartheid in Israel is necessarily strictly aligned with what happened in South Africa. But I think it's a useful term to distinguish what's happening there from a normal liberal democracy. So I don't know if there's much more that we can really say to disagree about this, because I mean we have intuitive disagreements over whether the word itself is useful.
Okay, I have a couple things to respond to,
Yeah,
and then
go
I
ahead.
have a question for you.
Okay.
You said that Area A is under military occupation because Israel is their neighbor and they're militarily superior and they're bound by agreements made during Oslo.
Not just that. No, I would say they. If you look at the situation they're in, if Palestinians in Area A wanted to solidify civil and military control, for example, and if they wanted to protest illegal Israeli occupation, which is illegal by international law for the Israelis to occupy Area C, although they do continue to occupy it, it is illegal under international law. Pretty much every nation besides the United States voted on this in the United Nations. If the Palestinians were to want to change their situation, they would be unable to because the PA is not a nation state in the way that Israel is. The PA is a semi-state.
Yeah,
It's not
I
a
agree with
full
you.
state. Yeah.
So my pushback on that would be, Mexico is not occupied by the United States because we neighbor them and are militarily superior. And I understand there's more to your argument. I'm going to address that as well. You can't fault the Palestinian people for an agreement that they agreed to, first of all, and then secondly. They are a semi-state for the reason that Oslo and Oslo II had the intention of establishing a full-fledged Palestinian state in the West Bank, but then the agreement was breached by Yasser Arafat, who went and negotiated at Camp David with Jimmy Carter, the Prime Minister of Israel,
Right.
and Yasser Arafat himself didn't like what was being told, even though he was given everything he wanted, and then he went home, bombed Israel, and launched the Second Intifada.
Well, I think that's sort of a misconstruing of how the Second Intifada started. The Second Intifada started because of what happened on the Temple Mount. It wasn't Yasser Arafat making the indiscriminate decision to just start bombing Israelis. It was the Israeli government's decision to violate sacred Muslim property.
It was just after the Camp David discussions, and Yasser Arafat himself ordered the Second Intifada to start. His wife, Suha, said that on Dubai national television, and she said it in a couple other papers that her husband specifically ordered Hamas to carry out the Second Intifada, and there are also Hamas leaders who say the same thing. And on top of that, regardless, it's a breach of the agreement. I think Israel has done a fantastic job of protecting the rights of Muslims who want to practice on the Temple Mount. For example, right now in Israel, Jews aren't even allowed on the Temple Mount. They have to pray on the Western Wall, and it's their Temple Mount. They own it, but they still allow Muslims to practice on the Temple Mount and don't allow Jews to, despite the fact that they're the Jewish state.